Hey, stop it. Is it... Stop. Don't make me come over there. That's what I thought. Oh. Hey.
Aloha! Welcome to this week's video. So this week is actually going to be the first part of a two-part series, and I've been really excited about this. So I have lots of scrap pieces from previous projects. As an example of one, just have dozens and dozens of them. And so what I decided to do is I'm going to be making an epoxy build where I combine a bunch of pieces together and mix them with epoxy. And so this is going to be the first step of that. So what I'm doing here is I'm just cutting them down to 1 inch. I'm using my resaw blade on my bandsaw and then just cutting down all of those pieces to 1 inch. You'll see why I did that. It didn't have to be 1 inch. I kind of just picked 1 inch. I think I picked the smallest piece and it was about 1 inch, and so that's what I ran with. I didn't really have a pattern in mind. I kind of just added, squeezed as much wood into the form as I could as possible. Having small gaps, trying to make it a little bit chaotic. I just thought the more combination and chaos there was, the better it was going to look. And then the epoxy that I'm using here is a really slow forming epoxy. I think it's Crystal Clear is the brand. Definitely not sponsored. But it's a 3-part epoxy. So it's 1 part resin and 2 parts hardener, I think it is, or the other way around. I can't remember. Either or. What I mixed first was the hardener. So it's 1 part hardener, 2 parts epoxy is what it is. So I mixed in the hardener, and then I went ahead and mixed in some pigment with that hardener. And I'm letting that sit for a second while I go and put on those forms. So what those bracers do is they're going to keep the wood from floating. So the wood's going to float just like it does in water. And so you have to keep it down. And that's the primary reason why I cut them all to 1 inch, is so that they wouldn't float, or so that'd be easier for me to put these bracers off. If they're all different heights, it would have been a really big pain to get that going. This is the epoxy I used. It's a midnight blue, and then the reform here, this is from a Honi Artisans. Jeez, I can't speak right now. I'm going to put his website in the description below. It's just a reused form that you can get from him. Now this is the version 1, and so I ended up taping it because you're supposed to seal it. I didn't put any sealer. I just used what was pre-existing. His current models have like a ring that goes around on the inside, and so you don't have to actually seal them. They just, when you connect them, they become watertight. One thing you have to be careful with on any form, whether it's a reused form like this or one you make yourself, is this epoxy is really light. It's a low viscous epoxy, and so what that means is it's not as thin as water, but it's pretty thin. And so if you have any holes at all, it will find those holes and it will leak the epoxy over everywhere. So that's actually why I put the whole thing on top of this black large trash bag, just in the event that it did start to leak, that I'd at least be somewhat safe, but ideally it doesn't leak at all. Now it's a little bit colder in my shed than it should be for this. I am not an expert at this. I watched a lot of videos from a lot of different channels to kind of get an idea of what to do here. I did have a heater going to try to keep it around 70 degrees. That was kind of what was recommended. It's still a little bit cool. I don't have it perfect 70 throughout the whole shed, especially down here low on the ground. And so I'm pouring, or attempting to pour, the epoxy directly into all of the cracks, but slow enough so that I don't get large air bubbles. I do want it to fill in without creating large gaps in the piece, because a large air bubble would be just a pain in the butt. And then I kind of went back and forth. I did mix way too much. There's some really good techniques on calculating how much epoxy you need. It is kind of expensive. There's Blacksteel Studio has a really good version on that. I kind of just winged it, and I regret that afterwards. All the epoxy that's left in that bucket, which is about half, was wasted. So I ended up winning when I went 4 parts hardener and 8 parts resin, as we were supposed to do, because it's a 3-part. I could have gotten away with 2 parts hardener and 4 parts resin. Now the resin is this epoxy it's a exothermic reaction, and so as it warms up, it starts to cure, and then the curing process causes it to warm up even more. And so those blooms, you can see those circular blooms, that's actually from that exothermic reaction causing those cool patterns. I mixed in a lot of pigment, and so I'm not gonna see those cool patterns in mine. It's just not transparent enough. If I didn't mix that much and left it a little bit more transparent, you would have seen it, but I didn't want to. I wanted it to be a really dark, almost black. Is kind of what I was going for. I didn't actually I would have used black if I had black. Midnight blue was the closest I had. So this is after letting it sit for a week. So that's about how long you want this to sit, especially in the temperatures that I had. It takes a long time for this to harden. But pulling out those little bricks there were really easy. I just had to break them loose. One was a little bit short and kind of buried deep, and so it was a little bit more of a challenge to pull it out. But it's kind of the benefit of this form kit is it came with all those little blocks. Once I pull out all of these fastener screws all the way around, the walls just pop right off, and so it's a really easy to use kit. Sounds like an ad. I'm not sponsored. But if you are going to be doing some epoxy pours, it's a pretty slick kit. I'm not right here. I was kind of unsure what to do, so I kind of just started whacking it on both sides, and sure enough, it did actually just eventually pop loose. If anyone here is a little bit more familiar with it, please let me know. I'm not, so I just kind of winged it, but it worked out great. You'll notice though that I poured it above the wood. It's probably not recommended, but in my case, I went ahead and did it that way just to make sure that as the epoxy filled in, it would, I wouldn't have an indent or a gap. And so I purposefully put too much in there, and then I'm using my bandsaw blade here to kind of like a plane. It's not going to be as clean as a plane if you were to run it through a planer, but more or less just resawing it back down to 1 inch and cutting off the large bulk of excess. Now there's still some low sections. Some of the wood wasn't perfectly set. I think so. I set the form level, but I did move it a couple times, and I think I did cause some movement of the epoxy here and there, and so that's what resulted in that. But for the most part, I cut that down to about 1 inch, and so I've got 1 inch on both sides. I actually didn't know what I was going to make with it at first. And so what I ended up deciding to do is I split the whole thing in half, so that way I don't waste too much material, and I can make more things out of this. And then I'm going to draw some more center lines, and out of half of it, I decided that I was going to make a leo mano, which I've made many times before, so I'm just going to be rough drawing it out, and then I'll be sketching it on the bandsaw. And I'm doing a fairly basic design on this leo mano. I kind of played around with the end of it a little bit just to see what I liked, what I disliked, but I kind of left it mostly basic because the highlight of the piece is going to be the wood and epoxy combination, and so I didn't want to take away from that highlight. I still have my resaw blade in. I think it's 1.25 inches or 1.5 inches, I can't remember. Man, it just sliced right through that. Worked beautifully. I got a little bit lazy and decided to try to cut it out with my resaw blade. Shouldn't do that. You should use the right tool for the right job. I do have a 1/4 inch blade that would have worked much better for cutting this out. I just didn't feel like swapping out my blades at the moment. And so what I did is just cut a ton of relief cuts and slowly cut it out with my resaw blade. It was kind of rough on the cutout, but that's okay. It's not a big deal. So this is going to be concluding the first part of the video. I was going to put the whole thing in one video, but my wife kind of complains and says my videos are too long. Next week will be the finished piece. I hope you enjoyed this video. Let me know in the comments below if you liked it. And if you had any questions about the epoxy pour, I'm not a pro. I just did what I thought was best. Well, mahalo plenty for watching. Like and subscribe, and I'll see you next week. Aloha.